My name is Tatiana Mironova, and I'm the part of Place of Art group. And Place of Art is a research project that focuses on the history of contemporary art exhibitions in Russia, in Moscow, precisely. And we also explore a wide range of problems, especially the problem of curatorial practices. And here with us today are the participants of our project, Natalia Smolyanskaya.
Hello.
Кристина Пестова.
Hi.
Полина Лукина.
Hello.
And Victoria Belonenko, who I think haven't joined us yet. And we are here today on the round table, the position of researcher of contemporary exhibitions between theory and practice. And this round table is a part of a conference exhibition as a means of analysis of contemporaneity, ethics and politics of the exhibition. The roundtable will be held in English, and I also want to say that we will publish the video of this event on our page on Facebook, and the transcription and video also on our website, and I will post the information here for those who are interested. And now I'm glad to introduce our speakers who are joining us today. And with us here is Natalia Prihodько. Natalia, hello.
Hello.
Natalia is a researcher and art critic now based in Paris, and she works on her PhD thesis in School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences in Paris. And I will briefly remind about your presentation. As we remember, your report, Human Relation to the World and the Problem of the Display and Dispositive Case Study of Sun and Sea Marina, focuses on the analysis of the artwork shown at the Lithuanian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale last year. And your analysis of the display and dispositive is based on three aspects, considering the viewer's position as power position, the division of the space and the problem of spectacular, and isolation of the nature within an artificial dispositive. So nice to see you here, Natalia.
And, and I would like to present our second guest, Nicolas Duro. Nicolas, hello.
Hello.
Nicolas is a curator and a former director of Saint-Fond Art Center in France. And during our conference, Nicolas presented a report, Spaces for Debate, and it was based on his curatorial experience in this art center. And to briefly remind our guests about the presentation, Nicolas described his curatorial approach on example of two projects of Christian Lampeta, Radio Station and Metanation Embassy. And these projects were built from within the context of the territory of Saint-Fond, thereby focusing not on the display of art, but on its construction in the process of art practice. Nicolas, hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And hi again, everybody. And I am very pleased to present Sonia Lau. Hello, Sonia.
Hello.
Sonia is an independent curator and cultural producer based in Berlin. And in terms of our small conference, Sonia presented her report, Curating Contingency, a mix of exhibitions that lend themselves to be affected. During her report, Sonia told us about two particular exhibitions, repaintings made in 2008 by curators Sonia Lau and Andrei Zigers, and Tirana Patience, a project curated by Natasha Illich and Adam Shimchik in 2019. Both of the projects were a reference to Sonia's idea of possibility of curating to be a process that can and allows itself to be affected by unattended and contingent interferences. And we have discussed the way curators can be sensitive and feel the dynamics of a situation that they find themselves in. Also, we touched upon an important question of what kind of knowledge curating can produce And what can an exhibition say about itself when curators have run out of words?
I would like to introduce Anna Zhurba, a curator of Moscow Museum of Modern Art. Good evening, Anna.
Hello.
I'm glad you've joined us. Anna will moderate our round table today. So now I yield the floor to you, Anna.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you for the invitation and this amazing opportunity to discuss the issues of ethics and politics of exhibition process that are becoming more and more bothering, I think, nowadays, especially in our context. One point of information is that hopefully we will have time for questions from the audience after the discussion itself. So if you feel the immediate need to share this your question, please put it into the chat, or after the discussion just show somehow by raising hand or somehow else that you have a question, and hopefully we'll have kind of bigger discussion with all the participants. And also a kind of disclaimer is that I won't try to relate this discussion to local Russian context directly, but I kind of assume that speaking as a curator based in Russia, working in the institution, it kind of influences probably the way I propose questions to the speakers, or I just put the problematics into words. And I want to thank Nicola, Sonia, and Natalia. I really enjoyed your presentations, but I also tried, as probably some of the our audience haven't heard all of them. I tried to kind of find the common ideas or common questions, issues in your presentations that are that were given from very different positions. Natalia's as the one of the researcher, Sonia's as an independent curator, and Nicolas as a curator of the institution. But let's see whether it's actually possible to find this kind of burning issues that kind of connect all of us. And I think first of these issues that was probably most common for all the presentations was the issue of context. And I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit more. First of all, because context exists as a multiplicity. I mean, even doing one project, you have the context of the institution, or non-institutional context, the context of geographical context, and of course, your personal context as a researcher or curator. And I think that, interestingly, for example, this personal context of the curator or researcher is actually quite important, and I wanted to know how you deal with that in your practice, because, for example, just to give like a very direct example, Nicolas, after living in Russia for a while, brought to Sanfon a lot of great Russian artists, which probably wouldn't happen if he would live in Cameroon or somewhere else. So yeah, if you have any ideas to start with that.
Okay, maybe I could start. Just because you have mentioned the fact that I invited the Russian artists in Sanfon. Yes, of course, my background had something to do with the programmation I made in Sanfon, and the fact that I lived in Moscow why and have some has some sense in my work, but to connect with the notion of context. This is also because those artists had something to say in the peculiar context of something. And speaking about Taus Makhacheva or Aslan Gaisumov, they were really connected with the question of language and the multiplicity of languages in the specific site and city of Saint-Fond, which is a territory in the south of Lyon, a very separate and discriminates space in the geography of Lyon. And the question of multiplicity of language and culture were what the main connection link between those artists, but not only, of course, and also some question related to religious question, Muslim questions also, and it was just a point of view to be discussed.
Yeah, but actually, I think this issue of, let's say, personal context or agenda of the curator or researcher, actually, I related to kind of a bigger issue that was mentioned by Sonia in her presentation, that the exhibition is always talking about the outside. And I think in many projects we see there is actually a kind of tension or conflict between the context, like the context of the exhibition and the context of the outside. And I wanted to discuss with you how important this kind of tension and conflict is or could be for contemporary curatorial and research practices.
I can share like one general thoughts concerning this question that you asked, because sometimes I think that if you're curating a project and you are having some kind of background, of course, the background and the context that you're coming from sometimes can be even a kind of a problem for you if you are facing another context. And it's just the question of your own experience, the way you will choose to work with this other narrative that you are facing, because it's sometimes difficult for a curator, I guess, to somehow distance herself or himself from this context that he or she was facing before. So, and if we are speaking about social projects, for example, it's very important not to try to speak like about this context that you're working with, but I like the phrase that Sonia used when she was making a report, that you're kind of learning from the context that you're facing. You're not taking it like as a unity, you're just trying to find something in it that you can be adapting for the situation that you're working with. So you have to be very delicate every time when you're working with the context that you have never faced before.
Yeah, totally. It's actually, it's somewhere 5 questions or issues further in my plan of the discussion. But I just think that all the projects that you've discussed and presented, we're dealing with a different range of conflicts, and I think this issue is very important for the Russian context in particular, how to talk about difficult issues, historical issues, like in case of Sonia's project, or current issues, like global issues, like in sun and sea, or the issues of the kind of regional social, as in Nicolas' projects. And I think this conflict is super fruitful, but very challenging. And that was actually the issue kind of that interests me a lot, like how to work with this conflict, how to, you know, how to construct discussion around it, especially like in the institution where you have a very kind of framed framework of what you're doing in a way.
I can say that it was precisely this conflict that attracted me in the work, Sun and Sea. That's why I wanted to discuss it. And I even think that maybe this work received like the main prize of the Venice Biennale of the last year, because maybe this very like event, the Biennale, recognized all these conflicts in this work. I mean, this relation of domination and power I spoke about, because the whole Biennale is institution. On the one hand, is like positioned as an important art event in the world, which like speaks about main trends. Well, maybe not in avant-garde of the art process, but it's an important view of like some important phenomena in art. But at the same time, this very event and institution is a kind of colonizer of the whole city of Venice. And I think maybe it was kind of its own inner contradiction that this institution recognized in the contradictions which were revealed by this work, Sun and Sea. And I think it's quite symptomatic. Also, as for the relation between personal and like exterior context, I think in the research, the personal context is very, very important, and maybe it's underestimated quite often, because like in research, we still often speak about, well, we speak about scientific methodology, but we don't speak enough, I think, about personal motivations, because when you see what are the topics of research and what are the backgrounds, the origin of the researchers, it's just like very often related, but we never speak about it, we never articulate it in the research. Well, I mean, it's very rare. It's not like something obvious, I think, but it starts to be more and more obvious, I think. So, and this work, for example, attracted my attention because of, yes, some very personal questions I had about art at that moment. And that brought me to go deeper into its analysis. So I think, yeah, it's extremely important.
Yeah, and I had this actually comment on the, for example, curatorial practice of Sonia, that it's like a bit kind of other shade of the same thing, is that it could be not only very personal or kind of, yeah, personal basically, but it could be also very artistic, because I find, I totally love a repainting project, but I think it could be actually the project by the artist rather than like curatorial project as we usually know it. And that's, I think, also kind of has something to do with the personal agenda of the curator or researcher. Is that so?
I mean, of course, I must admit that the people who inspire me most are artists, which every curator says, of course, artists, but I mean really how the way they work. I mean, not only that artworks inspire me so much, so I must admit there's more idols on behalf of artists that I learn from as a curator than curators. So that's of course some sort of personal, I mean, because for example, institutional critique, which is an artistic practice and not a curatorial one, it's probably my first, was probably my first influence, or gave me the idea I have to work in museums or something, even though, but not as artist, because I never felt as artist. But so of course I come from an artistic practice, but I wanted to maybe, what the question context specific, I mean personal context and the context of the exhibition. I think I must say I would always defend the possibility of a stranger to work anywhere. I completely understand that it can be a disaster, and it often it's not always working, of course. I mean, why should it? I mean, of course, sometimes projects are just not working. But in general, I just love the that people don't know certain things. I think it can be so liberating sometimes to not know everything. All the I have 2 kids and I have no babysitter. Somebody's sneaking in the background. You'll see. No, I gave them so much video. I mean, I can just an example from a German perspective. When I think of people doing projects in Germany, I mean, one of the best films I know about the Berlin Wall is by Lars Laumann. The strangest object fetish work ever, like a video work. I don't think any German could ever think about such a crazy idea, actually, when talking about the Berlin Wall. But it's a beautiful historical film. So I believe that it can definitely work. So I would never claim you have to know the context very well to work in it. But of course you have to love it somehow. I think affection is, to me, important. I mean, you can only do things that you somehow love, projects, and you have to be willing, of course, to not direct things that you need other people's help by, or you have to trust, of course, on a lot of people, on a lot of more people than if you work in your own context.
Yeah, but
the general defense speech for or also current documenta, I'm quite happy. It's a bit almost funny to imagine the collective working on documenta, which is so incredibly, yeah, even, I mean, 50 years, 60 years passed by, but it is still quite a Western institution. I'm just really happy to see what's happening. And I don't expect of them to know Germany very well, to be honest. I think they would waste their time.
Yeah, but when I talk about personal agenda, is more it's not like where you come from, and that you know, whether you're a curator or researcher, you should work in this city or country till the end of times. It's more like, you know, what bothers you, what kind of moves you ahead, and that could be yeah, totally. I totally agree that the outsiders sometimes could actually grasp the you know, the spirit of the place, or the art scene better than, you know, people who are there for years and years and kind of lose this you know, sharp eye because it's just part of their life. But actually I'd like to go back to this a bit later, but we also, I think, touched upon this this collective work, and I wanted to know whether you see like a shift in the recent decade, because with such a collective as forensic architecture, for example, when actually the project is produced by from the beginning with the collaboration of research, like research, artistic and curatorial approach all in one, because that's, I'm very curious to follow this this kind of collectives, because I think it's a very demanding thing for the curator to kind of follow the demands of the institution, of the artist, of the public, and, you know, do it all by himself or by herself. And do you think such collectives or such formats of project, they kind of bring us to another kind of curatorial and research reality, or they are not very different from, let's say, artistic collectives.
Is it still me?
It's for forever.
I mean, forensic architecture is, of course, a good example because they have a completely different use of the term art, or basically no art at all. Or I mean, and that's and therefore, actually, it's really attractive inside institutions. I mean, not for them too much. I think they don't really care about that. They have a different agenda of solving problems in the first place, but. For the status of museums, it's of course a beautiful conflict to see this interdisciplinary, ambitious, juridical working process with outcome that is first and foremost data, really. So data is almost an artwork, like to know where a ship was at a certain point in the sea when refugees were around is a data that is not an artwork that because then it would lose all its power, because the data is an important factor, but it can be inside a museum. It could find a place there to be considered as an incredibly telling aesthetic, like a political and aesthetic object, this data. For curators, I think that I just love the huge difference towards the traditional exhibition making that automatically comes up when you would work with forensic architecture. That as we had, it necessarily leads outside of the space, and it's basically also telling that we have not yet a space where it would fit somehow. It's, I think, very helpful, and maybe we don't need a space. I think it's okay to be at the wrong place also, as long as people see it. But it's beautiful that it's actually not neither fitting into the scientific world, nor in front of court, nor in the museums. So it's a prosthetic, the museum, for forensic architecture at the moment. But it's just showing the limits again, of showing a bit the old-fashioned way. It's kind of exposing the old-fashioned narratives that are still present if you would go from a modernist painting room into the forensic architecture room. It would be quite a big gap, which is not covered inside the institution, I think. But for a curatorial practice, I would think if you work with a collective as artists, I think that the role of the curator should be very minor, because very, very just like caring and helping, so to say. Like, since I think collectives are extremely self-sufficient entities. And so I think the curatorial knowledge is a relation of care, just really trying to support what's happening and mediate towards the institution, but I would interfere very little whenever I would work with collectives. I think they do best when they just sprawl their energies, I must say. No.
For the collectives and collectives which unite like artists, researchers, curators, scientists, and so on, I think it's a natural process to go into this kind of collaborations, because today I think all the notions like art, artist, curator, researcher, they are shifting, and there are like all kind of mixed practices which become more and more normal. So I think that's why it's natural that all the professionals with different backgrounds and different types of activities, their major activity, they come together and yeah, then there is the problem of all these institutional frames and how they range all these like products of their activity, of their collaboration that Sonia just spoke about. But I think the process itself is very fruitful, and I think it's something very interesting to observe and to participate now.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad that my colleagues don't think that such collectives will totally replace the socially engaged curator as a as part of the process. Another, actually, like the next issue I want to address, and we actually partly touched upon it already, is the issue of place, because Nicolas, for example, was talking about the art for each place rather than space for art. And also the responsibility when it comes to speaking for others. That would be like a question regarding the art system, because I actually wonder, what do you think, how the art system as it exists now, and how we all, like not all, but many of us operate in it with this kind of curator as a nomad, what we kind of discussed, and Sonia talked about just a few minutes ago, how it kind of correlates, and whether whether it's actually whether it's possible to be part of this system and at the same time change your optics every time to speak for the artists in when you change the geographical location. And what are, because you have the experience of doing that, and probably you could also share like what helps you to adjust your optics to this changing context. Nicolas, because I think you have the projects that were also traveling, right? Traveling exhibitions. So probably if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, when I spoke about art for each place, I have in mind that we have to adjust and to we have to make a kind of an expertise, a kind of let's say research on a peculiar, specific context to understand the tasks in this context. And to go back to the question you spoke about, collective cross-cutting knowledges in a collective work with different competencies. It helps to just to have a wide view of a context, and I don't think that we can work in a context alone. It's just you can, of course. It could be also a way, just a way to work. But if you want to be aware and just I think you have to know what happens in a context, and after that we can or not take in consideration those information. But first of all, you have to understand where you are, where you are going to make projects. And the question of art for each place is these particular approach, and like, let's say, like love in Bergson sense, for example. You can you have just to adjust your language to love in a context. And it's always a question of degree, and this is also a part of responsibility to speak for others, to understand in which degree you can love, in which degree you can speak about and with which artists will be relevant in a peculiar context. But the question of the institution is also another layer, and it's a big one. And inside the institution, also the system that proceeds to the system. I mean, for example, the art center of Saint-Fond is a municipal art center, so a public service, and we work with specific system with a financial control and with a lot of aspects, administrative aspects, and those aspects are also frames and frameworks. We have to fight with. So yeah, it's a completion.
So I think you shared your opinion on that, or do you have something to add regarding this question of system? Just, I think I put this question this way because to a great extent we are hostages of the system. Like we need to, we can't make projects in the outer space. Yeah, we need the location, the colleagues to introduce curators to the context, and so on, yeah, kind of become dependent on this systematic level of curating a lot, which could be kind of constant race for the curator, especially I guess for the freelance curator, because it's like you don't have one base like institution, but rather in the constant process of negotiation and finding partners and so on.
I just had a thought related to that, but I'm not sure if it answers your question. When Nicola mentioned the, or maybe you, the nomadic curator, I realized that, I mean, nomadism, I mean, it's a beautiful term, and maybe 10, 15 years I was admiring the idea of nomadism, but of course, and I don't think it concerns us so much, but it is it's extremely present in the art world, this kind of nomad idea. I mean, this is, we should not forget, it's has turned a very neoliberal idea, of course, as well, because it's not, I don't have the impression that curators in general go to work in different contexts because they chose that, but just because there's open calls here and there and opportunities and hierarchies, and people apply left and right, and they just move. I mean, nomadism is more, because you mentioned being taken hostage. I think a lot of people are taken hostage by nomadism more than choosing it as a structure. And a lot of people are actually probably very, very happy to really work at the same place for many years. So freelance was, of course, always a decision to work from project to project, but even for me, it was not necessarily a decision to travel the world, even though I love it. But in the last years, it was more also following the system. We should not romanticize the idea of nomadism so much at the moment. It's almost it's also very it was something very independent at one point, almost precarious, because nomadism is precarious normally. But now it's more like a minimum of professionalism to know this and this country in the very least. And it's a bit strange when somebody has not been to, I don't know, Dakar biennial or Guangzhou biennial. These people are like, oh, really? So it's a very competitive thing. So maybe if we talk about place of art and also resistance, there are reasons to assume that you could very well become more of a hermit and work more constantly in one location. So I personally also find the idea of working inside the institution very attractive now for this reason, simply because this traveling became purposeless almost, and you had to fill it with purpose, but only after you got the job, so to say. You couldn't go with purpose somewhere. So yeah, this is just the personal statement to the role of nomadism in our contemporary system. Yeah.
I totally understand what you mean, but I think it's just a matter of, you know, my kind of my optics, because actually Russian curators, it's more often when they are based in one city or country and they're, you know, you will rarely hear about Russian curator appointed artistic director of some institution or some biennale. It's quite still an exception. So it's kind of, you know, different side of the of this systematic kind of thing. And here I guess we get to the issue that I find personal the most important for my practice, and I'm really interested to hear your experience and as a starting point here I took Sonia, your idea that the exhibition lends itself to be affected, and my first idea after hearing that was like, and what about the viewer lending himself to be affected? And so this issue of spectator, as Natasha calls him or her in her presentation, or visitor, viewer, participant in some of your projects, I think it's super important, and actually kind of for me lies at the core of ethics and politics of any exhibition project. Probably my first question would be quite naive, but it also comes from the kind of perspective, local perspective. And the question would be how to relate the experiences of the visitor or viewer with the experiences that exhibition provides, meaning that for example, you were talking about emptiness as an important kind of idea for the exhibition projects. I think with the Sun and Sea, it's more about busyness, which is like the opposite of it. But and emptiness is actually quite difficult for a visitor, because it implies a lot of active action, and It's not about like, you know, huge exhibition that kind of falls on you with the all possible effects, but it's very demanding. And so what's your experience of working with the visitor or spectator or viewer, and how it works with the projects, for example, when hardly anything is exhibited in a very kind of, let's say, classic term of exhibit?
If we speak about this exhibition decrease based on this emptiness, the idea was not to show nothing, but to not to show art objects, and just to give the possibility to reach an artistic experience through something which is not an object, but a piece of paper with some information, but enough to understand the context and to have something to think about. And the notion of emptiness is for me very linked to the question of non-commodification of art. And I even would say non-commodification of love, to speak with Eva Ilus. It's really connected with the problem of system of art, and as Sonia said, the necessity or the obligation to travel, for instance, or to be part of a system, to be relevant. And I'm really not sure that we have to follow these roles. And yes, it's also a problem for the viewers, because I'm not sure that everybody understood the project I made, but maybe it's a bad point of view. I don't know, but I'm not searching for a massive impact of my projects, and I had some very good feedbacks on this particular project, and it's not maybe I had some really conflictual discussions also, and I think it's really important to disagree and to have the possibility to discuss. But it's even more interesting, I think, when people have this possibility to express and to express their disagree. Yeah, but maybe I don't answer the question.
No, you did, and the feedback that you get from the people of the neighborhood where the center is situated, or you mean like from colleagues and
from very different people, and this is why I'm quite happy. But yeah, but it's maybe a bit egoistic or even blind, but I also have sometimes the very powerful and enjoyable feeling to do something I have to do, and the project, like I have it in mind, and I just don't care if if it's so clear or not. And I think it's also linked to the point of view of Sonia. You have to accept some blind spots in your process of working, and also in the results. And I don't like the idea of controlling everything.
Mm-hmm. And Natasha, I think in respect of the viewer, Sun and Sea project is also quite interesting, because quite violent to both the performance and the viewers in a way. What is your idea of the kind of place and role of the viewer, and how in a way the project was mediated actually to the viewer? Spectator, yeah. Sorry, your term is spectator.
Yeah. Well, I was very attracted by this work because I think it reveals the position of the spectator as not like an innocent position, but as the position which is constitutive of the existing exhibition and displaying practices. And because we speak about curatorial practice, exhibition practice, and so on, but there are also like viewing practices and spectatorship practices, and they are obviously dependent on each other. And these spectatorship practices, they also change with time. So that's why I found this work interesting, because it was like, well, it was my personal, as I said in my presentation, it was my personal perception. Maybe other spectators of this work, they didn't feel the same, and maybe they didn't have the same questions, but it brought me to all these considerations about spectatorship practices. And for example, the art's role in them, because like if you take some centuries ago, the art was the main source for spectacular experience, for visual experience, or for it was like the main activity, the main I don't know how to say, discipline, which made people spectators. Today, art is not the only source for spectatorship experience. There are so many sources for this, with the television and internet and so on and so forth, that art has to compete for the spectators. So, and I think it's, well, for me, it's at the moment, it's interesting to reflect on all these spectatorship practices, because being part of this exhibition or that exhibition, this event or that event, we somehow allow it to reproduce. So we somehow confirm and authorize the existence and the reproduction of this or that events, exhibitions, and other practices. And here, for example, it came to my mind one example when in Paris took place the colonial exhibition of 1931. Surrealists said, "Don't go see it." So they they questioned this position of spectator. They said, "No, don't become spectator of this event." So I think, yeah, these are actually the questions I find interesting and which came to me through this work. And to come back to like more general question about the exhibitions and the viewers of the exhibition, of how the exhibitions or maybe even artworks are created, taken into account or not, the viewers' position or not. of course, there are a lot of very different cases. If we speak about a case like independent exhibition in some small art center or small, I don't know, not institution, but a place where, for example, artist studios are mixed with exhibition spaces, so this kind of art centers, or for example, institutions like Art Center in Saint-Fon, which is another case. It's another way of relating to the visitors, to the public. And then the big institutions, which has like a specific department for cultural mediation and working with public and so on. So these are very different cases. But for example, as I had some experience in this last case, so like big exhibitions with dedicated department, what is very contradictional is that such institutions speak a lot about the importance of relating to public, of cultural mediation and so on, but at the same time, this is like external service. It means an exhibition is prepared by one team. It becomes a ready product, and then all this work with public comes as something which would be put on it when it's already done, actually. And today, for example, there are some discussions about how to integrate into the conception of the exhibition this work with public, how we can construct a different relation to public through the very like conception of the exhibition. So of course it touches upon institutional organization and so on and so forth. So it's another discussion, but yeah, so I think it's a very interesting issue, but which has like many different cases and many different aspects.
Yeah, I think the starting point for this question for me is always, and I'm pretty sure you all know this situation that, for example, in let's say Moscow context, it always often happens that there are either huge shows for kind of very wide audience and like people break down doors of the museum, so on and so forth, or there are actually exhibitions that touch upon you know, social issues that are actually important for people, like let's say, I don't know, from ecology on a city level to I don't know, gender issues, and like hardly anyone apart from the art community and let's say science research community come there, and for me, like this big question is you know, how to bring two of these phenomena closer together, so that, because the issues like these social and political issues don't really attract in forms of the exhibition projects. Even when they happen, they don't attract kind of wider audience than the professional ones.
Well, I think it's maybe something to do with the larger issues of yeah, society, of yeah, it's maybe banal to say, but of education and of time, of all this social, like social situation, which brings people to this or that kind of yeah, exhibitions or events. So what they are looking for. So I think it's yeah, I know that, for example, big institutions, they really invest a lot in attracting public. But it's the question I'm asking myself now: should art really try to attract? As Nicolas said, yeah, sometimes we just want to study a subject or make an exhibition or make a project because we have in mind and we don't care what others think. So if there is a kind of encounter which comes out of this project, it's good. But yeah, so I understand that it's maybe more difficult to bring large public to very to the exhibitions which speak more about complicated topics and not just give a very spectacular experience. But yeah, maybe it's just it, and maybe it's not a necessity to try to attract more public to that. And also, I think if it doesn't come from the inner desire to go and to see and to meet someone, then it will not work anyway. Well, I don't know, it's the question I'm asking myself now.
Yeah, I can only agree. Unfortunately, I can only agree that yeah, I could not really see the value of learning from the market, or it's kind of obvious that the way politics or gender or whatever is narrated within within a, so to say, curated exhibition in the way we mean it here in this round table. It's a very complex, subtle, psychologically challenging way of communicating with each other that it's impossible to think that it would be attractive to it. I mean, it's just a lot of people who really do not, are not so interested in talking about things that specific way. And I could not really see a bridge how to change that specific way of communicating with each other, to flatten it, or to, because it would really lose a bit the point of working like this in the first place. For me, often the exhibition space is not a place of quantities or a quantifiable audience, but I just hope for individuals who do not come as consumers, so to say, but who take something much stronger for their own practice, or for their own what's the name, for their own jobs, or for their own philosophies of writings or thinkings, which really they will put into practice in this or that way. So I see it more like something, handing something actively over to somebody who uses it, so it doesn't happen in masses, but it happens very strongly and effectively amongst each other. So
yeah, but I think I probably wasn't clear enough. I'm not talking about kind of marketing this you know, kind of difficult and at the same time urgent topics. It's more about like hospitality towards the viewer, and yeah, and kind of inviting for kind of proper communication and dialogue, rather than being very, you know, kind of closed up in the research, or I don't know, in the curatorial concept or whatever.
yeah, well, I'm still, conversely, what I could see is that what I would hope for is that institutions who have a lot of audience, don't necessarily don't really, I mean, they have, I think they could also do much more politically with very easy messages. Just an example that, and I don't know how the story ended, but there was this Leonardo da Vinci birthday, I think last year or something. And of course the Louvre was preparing everything, or maybe it was 2 years ago, I don't remember, but the problem was that Italy was radicalizing more and more towards the right wing, and they didn't want to give the paintings to the Louvre anymore, certain ones. And that was, I mean, and just that an institution would maybe then just leave the empty spots, you know, instead of covering the whole political drama up. And that would be extremely easy for everybody to understand that that would be two exhibitions in one. You could see the Da Vinci retrospective, but you could see that paintings are, because of claiming nationalities of artists who have been dead 500 years, claiming their genetic data, if it was more Italian or French, also, of course, the value of those paintings. And so then you have a very easy discussion that I think everybody gets without any previous information, or I can see that potential in large institutions to send those messages. Vice versa, I think that the smaller research-based spaces, I conceive them as already already working a lot with hospitality and with collaborative approaches, couldn't really tell how they could transform towards a larger audience. The only thing they could definitely transform, every art center could definitely be also collaborative with other art centers. Often, unfortunately, like the typical drama of anything that is left wing is the particularization of different groups into more different groups and specialization, and all of a sudden the parts don't fit, cannot collaborate anymore because so they are, but this is, I think, happening right now a lot. I think at the moment there's so much talk about solidarity, and I think that all these small nuclear cells of the independent art scene, they try to really be more respectful at the moment with each other. I hope. That was my care and motherhood is another subject, but we will not touch it today.
And I think the last issue that I wanted to offer you to discuss is the issue that actually didn't pop up that often in your presentations, but I think it could be kind of a carrier of the political and ethical issues of the curatorial and research processes. It's the issue of curatorial knowledge that you, Sonia, mentioned briefly in your presentation. Actually, this issue is something I wanted to discuss on a from the very roots, because I wonder whether you can see the curatorial knowledge still as a very specific kind of knowledge, because when you mentioned it, I started to think that probably it's not, because knowledge is usually a result of some thought or some experiments and so on and so on. And I think that curatorial knowledge is quite specific because it's more of a process rather than a result. And even if you have it kind of close to the form of the result, you then have adjusted all the time.
I mean, as I mentioned in my talk, it's to me it's a fascinating term, because I, of course, really would like to know what it means. I believe that it exists, and it must be something that can only be gained within this curatorial, this exhibition making process. I mean, what it kind of means, and the question what that is, particularly, of course, it's not only, as I mentioned in my talk, actually wrongly now, I think it's not only knowledge of my context, the context of the institution, I mean, all these places, and obviously this is called Places of Art, this conference, but I completely forgot, of course, it's also communication with representation. I mean, we work constantly with images of society, which are always representations, either mostly imageries, but also by performance. And I think curatorial knowledge is probably a collective approach to work with images, reproductions of our society, with representations. So this kind of dialogue with representative forms. And I forgot this in my talk, because there I considered only the curatorial knowledge as something that distills one's curatorial vision, like the exhibition project, the content of it, and the artist's gesture and the audience gesture and the political and social context where this exhibition takes place, if they intersect. But of course, the question is what happens to the pictures in the exhibition and what happens with these representations and how do we interact with them. And I think therefore curatorial knowledge makes sense as a term, because I don't know the other forms of knowledge where so many individuals talk with images and through images and through representation towards a certain goal. And not only representation, but also representation, small, big, in different angles, outside, inside. I mean, this is a constant attempt to place images of the world in the most strangest constellations, art somehow. And the curator is one of the persons who should be concerned about where these images are placed and how they look and what they do in this and that spot, and by whom are they made. And so yeah, that's my sort of say summary of how I would, what I generally think, what the ingredients are of curatorial knowledge. Yeah, I think the way it's also conceived, of course, it's that it's I mean, if we would really know, if there was a definition for it, it would be senseless. I mean, the only reason curatorial knowledge as a term is alive is that, of course, it's not yet occupied as a method or strategy. You cannot do it right by doing 3 or 4 things together and then it just happens. So, and most of it, and I think it's used, if I'm not wrong, it's used a lot at Goldsmith, for example, in London. I think that's how the program is called, like that, which already points at this is something always that goes from curator to curator as a constant dialogue, always transforming.
Kind of the only, probably one or the only kind of knowledge that I guess would kind of die out without communication immediately, because I think that communication is also like very important part of curatorial knowledge. I recently read an interview with Simon Cleachley, who said that his first curatorial experience was quite surprising because he made a show in Apex Art and he just wanted to organize a place where people could come to watch a football championship and like hang out, being from like different countries and like strangers in the city. And he said that he found out that curating implies a lot of very kind of unexpected experiences and issues to be solved. Natasha, Nicola, probably you want to add something on the curatorial knowledge. I think it wasn't part of your presentations directly, but kind of as this I don't know, place where we keep all the issues related to politics and ethics of curating.
Yes, if I speak about curatorial knowledge, I would say that I'm really not sure that I'm doing well, and it's a really big part of the practice, I think, to delve to just re-evaluate each time and in each context my competences and my possibility to approach and to understand a context, but also just yeah, kind of a landscape. But and I'm not sure that curatorial knowledge is more relevant than any other form of knowledge. And maybe we can see curatorial practices as some cross-cutting practices for once again, negotiating the world and creating new narrative, but almost like a member of a parliament, we could say. A curator has no inherent competencies, but the capacity of being flexible and aware, and according to his or her sensibility and an open mind, and of playing with the artists, with forms and images and languages and knowledges and effects. But it's really, for me, it's really connected with the notion of once again, with the notions of emptiness, slowness, and in a way of vacuity, of being a tube. If we speak with, I don't know if you know this book of the Belgian writer Amélie Nothomb, who wrote the metaphysics of the tubes and how to be in a kind of a vibration in a context, and just to be a tube. It seems to be a bit empty, but I really like this image, and for me the most relevant vibration today, and even more after and during the crisis we are living with the virus, is accepting our vulnerability, and to be affected, as Sonia said, to be affected and to accept, in a way, injuries. And I also like the image of Aikido practice and philosophy, to receive and transform an attack into a love response, into kind of neutral and even more positive standstill. Yeah.
As for me, I don't really much to say about curatorial knowledge. I don't really have curatorial practice, and I also have, I think, many problems with this figure of curator, because there are a lot of questions for me related to art system and so on and so forth. But I think it's maybe not. I think there are a lot of just common problems related to the knowledge itself, whether it is curatorial or any other, because even in the research area, knowledge is also a process. It's okay, there are some forms you have to publish, you have to write a PhD dissertation and so on and so forth, but it's also a result which could be revisited at any time. And so I think there are just a lot of same questions about the practice and theory to get into a certain knowledge.
So probably someone else has questions or comments, or probably the participants of the discussion want to raise completely different issues that we've missed out today.
I have just hello.
Hello.
My name is Elena Rumina, and I work as an independent art curator. Also, I have an experience for more than a year. I worked in the exhibition department in the Federal Museum here in Moscow. And I work as chief coordinator of the Moscow Biennale of Contemporary Art in 2017. I can add that by my mind, curator is like medium. And of course, curator can have ideas which can be coordinating with the contemporary moment, very sharp moment in policy, in ethic ideas, and so on, ecology ideas. But on the other hand, a curator can be can have his or her own policy. For example, me as curator, I'm interested in working with archetype ideas. And by my mind, at the same time, it's a very important thing to follow marketing rules. It's not something wrong or something horrible to follow marketing rules, because marketing is the thing, is a discipline which help us as curators to feel the other side, the spectators, the visitors. And it's the thing which help us to the visitor's eye, visitor's reaction, and even to build it up from inside of us, from our experience, from our ideas, and on the same time, to make spectators and visitors follow us and to build the emotional connection, which will bring the connection in our ideas, which will help visitors to understand our ideas. Because often they understand, of course, through the images and through the structure of the exhibition, not even through articulations of ideas, which you will hang as text on the exhibition, of course, yes. The problem with museums and with institutions, which many people, it's the problem that museums often are not ready to follow ideas. They depend very much on the official course, on the Minister of Culture, and on the policy of Department of Culture of the state. So they often are not so brave to follow some ideas, and ideas in federal museums, for example, often the thing which they will follow less than to follow anything else, because the main thing, unfortunately, is money, money which they have to earn because of the order of Minister of Culture, for example. Of course, some state structures which consist of the system of many galleries, of course, they can follow curators' ideas, and it often depends on the people who are the directors of this system. So it's possible to have your own ideas, to build up through the marketing system the connection with the future visitors, and to make visitors follow your ideas. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah,
It was possible to hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, that was a very realistic insight into state cultural institutions life in a way.
I just would like to make a response to your comments. From my point of view, and I don't work in your institution, but I really I think it's a very suspicious idea of wanting to be followed, and yeah, I'm very happy when I do things that people understand, but I also really happy when they react in a negotiation and do not follow the project, the idea, or the main, I don't know, yeah, when the project creates debate, not consensus.
But I think also that you can build your join ideas with the visitors. It's like a game, isn't it?
Maybe I don't understand your idea.
If that's like a community work, you mean, or like bringing people together under the, you know, umbrella idea that you share from the beginning, I guess. Are there any other comments or? Yeah, Polina.
Yeah, I have a question, if we can move on. Maybe? Yes, I have a question about the issue of relationship between the curator and the place that we discussed earlier. Recently, in my opinion, in many periodic exhibitions, biennale, triennial, biennial, and so on, we could notice kind of a speculative approach to the place when this place turns into kind of exotic place or something. For example, in my opinion, again, we can see this in the last edition of Manifesto in Palermo. And I have a question maybe to Nicola and Sonia as curators. How and is it possible at all for curators from the outside who do not live or work in this place to avoid such exoticizing approach to the place? Thank you.
Yeah, it's possible, but once again, you have to work with different source of knowledge and people, and you have to you cannot work alone. It doesn't make sense, and I agree with Sonia when she said that you have. You don't need to understand and to know the context very deeply. I mean, it's better, but you don't have to know all about the context to make a relevant proposal.
I think actually there was a very good example if we talk about this like large-scale exhibitions. I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but the project that Caroline Christoph Bakarjiev done in Istanbul, I think was done very nicely in terms of the local context and like the knowledge of the place and its history. I think it was extremely carefully done.
I have a question mostly to Natasha, according to her topic of the report. I was thinking that there is our personal experience as a spectator. My question is about this position between researcher and spectator. We mostly talked about a position between curator and researcher, but here is, I want to address to this aspect, and there is our personal experience as a viewer, as a spectator, and in the project, for example, Sun and Sea. Yes, and there is the curatorial optics of this work, and that can be seen by the spectator or can not be seen. It depends on the personal experience. And what do you think? Can we rely fully on our personal experience being a researcher, or and is there a difference between the experience of the viewer as a researcher and experience of the viewer itself? Can we talk about this, or is it not essential?
Oh, I think it's a very important question. And for example, this small research I've made about, or more like reflection that I presented about this work, actually comes out of my experience as spectator. It means that I was, first of all, spectator of this work, and then what actually it questioned in my mind, pushed me to think more about it and to go into a certain research, actually. And I think any so here research could be seen as like advanced version of spectator's experience, and I think any spectator's experience could be a form of research. I think any spectator, even he has no knowledge about artist, artwork, context, whatever, even if it's difficult, because if he comes, sees something, maybe he already knows anything about it. But anyway, he can know nothing about it and have some kind of point of entrance, some kind of sensibility, which could be a starting point to build a relation with this work. And then it depends on the attitude of everyone. It could start for research, to go to read about the artist, artwork, about the context, or to just think about some questions it put in the mind and go read some, I don't know, books about this particular question. Or another version, which is like exploited a lot in big institutions as a kind of chain, like consumption. So, and unfortunately, a lot of work of cultural mediation is finally doing this job, like serving on the plate certain facts that public is expecting for, to be reassured that they understood everything, but actually you can never understand everything fully. So it's like constant questioning, constant research. So I think it's just up to everybody to see whether he or she wants to make of his spectator experience a research or not, and how deep he or she wants to go into all this questioning.
But are we somehow responsible for our experience as a spectator being researcher?
You mean if we, like, people who are researchers, who identify themselves as researchers? I think there are two things. There is a kind of obligation. If you, for example, an art critic, there is kind of obligation to go and see things, to know what is happening and so on, even if you don't like, but you have to. And there is another thing, you go to see really for yourself, like for your pleasure. Yeah, so I think there are two things. I start now to dedicate more time to things which interest me personally as spectator, which like surprise me, which put me in front of some questions I didn't think of, or which I cannot resolve, or I don't have answers, so I have to go and search for these answers. So for me personally, it's more interesting when my personal role of spectator comes together with my role of researcher.
Hello. I got a question. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this roundtable. It was very interesting, and I appreciate your time. And I want to go back to the topic of context. I think somebody raised that already, but I want to come back to it because I think it's very important. And I think this is where practice meets theory. So somebody said that it's sometimes not important, or we should not care about the context and the place we're in or where we design our exhibition, which partly true. And I think it all depends on the goals that we set. In some places, for instance, I don't know, if you bring some contemporary artist just to make a retrospective for his first solo show, it is indeed, doesn't matter where you do it, and you just follow your own idea or the idea of the artist. But if, for instance, you make a manifesto or you make some show that is, it directly depends on the context, I think this is where you should consider the history and where you should go deep into the history maybe of this place. Because for instance, let's take feminism. If you make an exhibition on feminism somewhere in Germany, this is a completely different topic, and it will differ from the feminism exhibition or exhibition on feminism in the States, and it will differ from the exhibition on feminism in Moscow, because these are three different histories, and you can't just I mean, it makes sense, of course, to make an exhibition about American feminism in Russia. Yeah, why not, if it's your goal? But in some cases, I think we should not ignore context. We should not ignore the history of the site or the state, the place, the building, doesn't matter. And I think we should consider it at least partly whenever we make a research. And this is why we're talking about theory. And this is why I actually clicked on this round table and wanted to hear more about how you guys, how practical curators take theory and collaborate, like work with it and include it in their work. Yeah, partly my expectations were satisfied, and thank you very much.
I would say that to some extent these things are kind of given as granted, like no, like we never discussed that you know, you could totally ignore context. It's more that you shouldn't be from the city you're making exhibition into to do the exhibition in this city, and I think it's like a matter of actually curatorial ethics, like a very important one. So I don't think that what you said contradicts what Nicola, Natasha, and Sonia were saying.
Okay, sorry, then probably I misunderstood it or confused. Yeah, but thank you.
So are we heading to?
I think Nicola left us, yes. Maybe accidentally.
I would like to add something, some question, something to Natasha. After your analysis, I can see my own experience of the exhibition you talked about differently. When I watched the performance, I was invited by an assistant curator to go down and participate in the performance. But I was tired, and so I refused. But now I think that I was scared of that fragile position when my white and unprotected body would be seen by all the spectators. And what do you think about my point of view after your communication?
Yeah, maybe anyway, this work, like for me, came first on kind of intuitive level, and then I tried to articulate for myself what was like uncomfortable for me or what was challenging. So yeah, I think it could be that. So maybe it comes first from the sensations, and then we can put it in some words or not.
And I would like, we talked about curatorial knowledge, but so could we say that curatorial knowledge is knowledge in process, and it's a real part of an interactive transition between theory and practice? It's my question to Sonia.
I'm reconsidering. I mean, I also liked, of course, Natasha's and Nicola's comment in as an important reminder of kind of the kitsch factor, such a term could awake, or or even almost some sort of hierarchy that it kind of lifts you up, that you do curatorial knowledge or something. But I mean, I think it's definitely in, of course, knowledge in progress, but I think it's also really knowledge between individuals, contexts, and also in a way scenography. Maybe the exhibition is a scenographic statement that so different forces work together, but at the end what you see is a scenographic result, and hope that is maybe the object of interpretation for, and that, yeah, I think the scenographic factor is quite important, like the relationship of things to the space. Yeah, it's definitely in process and progress, because also, as I said, it's a communication between also extremely different practices. I mean, curatorial knowledge, I would think, is also something that happens when, say, forensic architecture writes a text and then Maria Lind writes another. I mean, now I'm just naming the important, the usual suspects, but and as an example of still very different practices. But I think curatorial knowledge is exactly also that some very different but radical in their own right practices try to communicate with each other. I think that's probably also where this idea gains significance, this idea of curatorial knowledge. It remains very obscure. So, and I think Nicolas also does it. I don't know if he's back, but I loved how he said that he's probably doing a very bad job in it. Because, yeah, you can never just have a very good word for something and then hope everything is fine. I mean, you still have to have a good work, and then maybe you have to have a good work, and hopefully good words follow you, like curatorial knowledge. But I think that's what he meant. He's not. Yeah, it's a nice frame when curators speak to each other and try to learn from each other. But yeah, it's not a religion, so to say.
Are there any other comments or questions, or everyone is tired and ready to finish the discussion? Yeah, we've done quite a good job with almost 2 hours of discussion. So thank you so much, everyone. The organizers, the participants, and those people who joined us. It's amazing weather in Moscow, so we're lucky to have the audience because it's very rare. Yeah. So we're done, right, Natalia?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Thank you, everyone.